I hope people listening to this will try to see in how a work of art like this, and I ain't trying to like get hoity-toity, but how a work of art like this comes to be.
Right.
Like the obsessions of a human being rendered into a canvas that's like about like life.
Inherently entwined with life and death realities.
Yep, that's it.
I mean, it is life and death reality.
Yeah.
I mean, and to have it dramatized so well on those cave walls so long ago.
Yeah. Bill Moyers asks him about the hunt, and he says and I can't say it like Joseph Campbell. He actually struggles to get the words. Like he is like really trying hard not to mess this up.
Yep.
And he said it is the one place where human beings become nature. I want to thank the Filson Company for sponsoring this podcast. We wouldn't be here without them. Since 1897, Filson has outfitted woodsmen, hunters, and anglers with the best clothing and gear. I don't know if anybody remembers the Filson tin pants, which were a standard logger pant back in the old days, and ended up being used also by bird hunters and anybody who needed a completely indestructible pair of pants. Filson's archives are full of testimonials to the Mackinaw wool, the tin cloth pants helping sportsmen survive in the wild. In support of the Forest Service efforts to protect our public lands, Filson's limited edition collection of Smoky Bear products has just hit their website. And with a full selection of fishing vests and dry bags for rafting, and I use a dry bag for everything now. But Filson has you covered, and it goes from the Kenai to the Madison. Come on out and check out Filson.com for any gear you might need. That's Filson, unfailing good since 1897. Thanks again for their sponsorship. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Backcountry Hunters and Anglers Podcast and Blast. I'm Hal Herring, and I'm here today. I read a novel, it's been about a year ago. I think maybe 6 months ago, called Painted Horses by Malcolm Brooks. And as I was reading the book, he and I had corresponded a couple of times, and what is it? Chris Dombrowski had said it's a novel of death, war, sex, and death.
Blood, sex, and war. I
Blood,
think.
sex, and war, and it's a style, and it's written in a style that we don't see really anymore. It's a huge book. It's an epic novel. It's set in the Bighorn Canyon of Montana, and I immediately wanted it's got some great guns in it, Mannlichers, and I just immediately wanted to try to get this guy on the podcast and talk hunting and a lifeline of hunting. And we've been out shooting guns this morning. I got to actually shoot the gun that appears in the book.
Yep.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that. But I wanted to welcome Malcolm Brooks, and thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me, Hal. It's a great honor to be here.
This is awesome. I just and I'm a huge fan of the book. I just and as I one reason I want to get you here was as we talked about this morning. I just like this book is a huge epic like adventure.
Sure.
And it ties in what things I had never even thought of, which was the archaeological exploration of London,
right
after the Blitz,
yep.
when the bombs had opened up the craters. And I as I read the book, I would ask myself, like, what brought you to this story? And we'll talk about your back. Let's go to your background first. So,
yeah.
You're a carpenter in Missoula at this point.
I am, yeah.
And you actually worked in the outdoor industry for a while.
I did. Carpentry is my oldest sort of occupation. My dad was a building contractor and carpenter, and I started to work for him when I was still a teenager. I mean, if he had a concrete pour or something going on when I was a sophomore in high school and he needed help, he would just keep me home and I'd go to the job site, that kind of thing.
Gotcha.
And then I guess did what you would consider a formal apprenticeship with him after high school for 5 or 6 years, which delayed my going to college. And this is in Northern California in the Gold Rush country there. But finally, I was always into hunting and fishing and horses, and we lived in a very rural area in Northern California.
This was the El Dorado County?
El Dorado County, Placerville, California, which was called Hangtown back in the day, and that's where I went to high school.
Why was it Hangtown?
It was initially it was essentially lawless, and somewhat in the manner of the Montana Vigilante Committee and whatnot in the 1860s. I mean, they had done the same thing there 25 years earlier.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So, at any rate, I mean, I'd always sort of mythologized Montana because I was Field and Stream and Outdoor Life and Sports Afield, reader from the time I was probably 11 years old, and I was a big reader anyway. And I read the novel Lonesome Dove the year it came out, when I was 14 years old, and the whole epic trail drive to Montana, I think, really sort of it kind of hybridized with the Montana hunting stories I was reading, and so. Eventually I landed on Legends of the Fall, by Jim Harrison and Thomas McGuane and his writing about angling and his novels. Montana was a place I was really interested in from childhood, really. So at any rate, to come full circle, once I decided to get serious about getting a formal college education in my mid-20s, the University of Montana was kind of a no-brainer for me.
Gotcha.
Because it had the reputation with the English department and, the MFA program there and whatnot, which I did not go through myself, but it was that combined with the outdoor opportunities and the fact that I'd gotten really into fly fishing at that point was how I wound up actually living up here.
I got you. What years was that?
That would have been 95 is when I moved to Missoula.
Gotcha.
Yep.
And that was, you studied with Bill Kittredge?
I did. Yeah. As an undergraduate.
Yeah. And what did your degree in?
It's in English.
Yeah.
Gotcha. And then I did quite a bit of the coursework for the graduate journalism program, but I never actually did finish.
Gotcha. I remember we had a bunch of cross references there. Courtney Lowry and all those people and that I ended up working with. That's just it's fascinating to me how people arrive at the places they are, and it's like the journey, the hero's journey, like Joseph Campbell, stuff. Which if nobody's ever read it, I've been corresponding about Joseph Campbell lately for Bizarre, from all different kind of people. Yeah, and it's the hero with 1,000 faces and the mythology of humankind, really. The power of myth was the series.
And those, old sort of archetypal models of, heroic archetypes and whatnot.
The Odysseus story.
Yeah, I mean, it still resonates with the modern human psyche, and I think
in a sense, it's in your book as well. And I'll tell you, in a way, Catherine LeMay's journey, in Catherine LeMay being a character in the book Painted Horses, is kind of a hero's journey of her own, of a woman's.
Yep.
Which I think is very unique. And so you came to Missoula, went to college, and you stayed?
I did. Yeah. I've been in Missoula ever since. My family was fairly itinerant when I was a kid, and as a function of that, the house that I live in now in Missoula, I bought that place in 2005. It's the longest I've ever spent anywhere in my entire life.
Yeah. Well, and you like it?
I love my house. Yeah. Missoula itself has grown so much since I first moved there that it's not quite what it was at the time. But I mean, I've got kids. I mean, so I likely would have moved out of Missoula proper probably quite a while ago and gone, someplace like Augusta, where we are now, or Red Lodge. I mean, I love the town
Red
of
Lodge,
Red Lodge.
Sweet too.
Yeah, just someplace that's a little smaller and a little easier to get sort of more immediate, instant access to outdoor opportunities and whatnot. But all of that said, I mean, if you have to, be somewhere because family demands it, Missoula is
pretty good
certainly
town.
Not bad.
I just the Missoula also can be completely wonderful if you don't have to drive. If you're bicycling or if you're within walking and stuff,
Right,
then
yeah.
it's like it's kind of paradisical in a way. And then when you get in the car and move around, you lose that.
Yeah. I mean, the road system there, or the road grid there, was so clearly not.
Right.
They were not crystal balling the amount of traffic
that they were going to get.
Currently.
Yeah, I hear you.
Yeah.
Well, so you also do. I mean, we were talking about how much time you spend hunting every year, like for years, and that's when my wife, when we were talking about, it's like that's just a huge, like that month, 6 weeks, 8 weeks if it's birds.
Yeah.
2 months.
Yeah, and bird hunting is really my first love. I mean, I do hunt big game as well, but it's far more of a practical go get the meat. And
y'all been big lucky on the elk. For sure is what you were telling me.
Yeah, between me and my oldest son, we've done pretty well, both drawing, some difficult B tags and then filling them as well. And so that's worked out well the last few years.
Yeah.
But I've had bird dogs since I was a kid.
Gotcha.
A whole series of them, and that's really what they call the opening of grouse season in Scotland the glorious 12th, August 12th, and it's just, for me, it's sort of the glorious
September 1,
September 1, or the really glorious October, second Saturday where pheasant season opens up. I mean, those are the days that just make me really happy to be alive.
You waterfowl hunt too?
I do.
Yeah. And then when y'all were in Northern California, you were saying you were a quail hunter?
I was a quail hunter, both valley quail and mountain quail, where we were in the foothills there where I lived. And so growing up there, it was quail and doves were the two things that we mostly hunted in terms of like flighted upland birds. But it's also full of wild turkeys there.
Yeah.
My brother actually is a turkey guide and has been for a long time. And he was a competitive turkey caller for a long time, extremely successfely.
Wow.
Yeah.
What kind of turkeys?
They're Rio Grandes there.
No doubt.
Yeah.
That's a part of California that I never thought. I mean, I've never thought about that. And I know people in California who are avid hunters.
Yeah.
I've never talked to them about that.
Yeah.
It must be a dramatic place to hunt.
It is. It's west slope of the Sierras, and it's rugged country. I mean, the roads are name things like this hollow, or it's almost Appalachia like. Not in terms of vegetation, but in terms of the general sort of like topography and geography, and there's these like deep dark draws and canyons and
Yours and there's Manzanita and Live Oak.
It is.
And the turkeys are in the oak.
Yep, they sure are.
Wow. And y'all ran in, we were talking about, I'm sure you run across like dope plantations all the time in the old days.
Yeah. Well, El Dorado County for a long time, I don't know that this still is the case, but it was the second highest pot producing county in California after Humboldt.
Yeah.
So, we would encounter gardens, small scale gardens frequently.
Was that a problem? Did people guard them and stuff?
We never ran into any of that we were aware of. I mean, you always heard sort of rumors that there were booby trapped ones, and that you didn't want to stumble upon one that was actively being worked by somebody, and we never had any situation like that. The ones that we would find were pretty small scale. I mean, it'd be like a couple of dozen, 5-gallon buckets with a plant in it and a kind of a rinky-dink irrigation system that was tapped into like an actual irrigation canal.
Because it's too dry there to grow stuff without that, right?
Yeah, it's really dry.
Well, it's such a California is just like the most interesting, really, terrain.
It is.
I mean, can you imagine what it was like when the friars were there and and there was no people really?
Yeah.
You ever read, is it 9 years before the mast? That sailor book?
I don't think I have.
God, so it's a famous book. Tom McGuane actually put me onto it in an interview years and years ago. Mm-hmm. He said that this Teddy Blue Abbott's book, We Pointed Them North.
Yeah, a book I love.
Yeah, it was like the definitive book of the trail drive.
Right.
And then he said, and it's 9 years before the mast, because Tom McGuane was a sailor as well. And I immediately went and got the book, and they shipwreck on the beach in Southern California.
Interesting.
There's grizzly bears on the beach, and they have to really be careful. But it's paradise.
Mm-hmm.
And they find these Franciscan friars.
Mm-hmm.
I guess they're Franciscan. I don't know. That's in my mind.
Sure, yeah.
And there's salmon, there's steelhead, and there's oaks, and it's just like paradise.
Yeah.
Which is why everybody moved there.
Yep, definitely.
But I just find it amazing that my friends from California, that I know the regulations are very complicated, like for black-tailed deer hunting.
Sure, yeah.
Is that true?
Yeah.
Or have you not? You hadn't done that in a long time,
It's been a while since I've done it, but my brother is still actively, and I mean, he's got probably, I don't know, 6 or 8 like true Boone and Crockett class trophies hanging up on his wall.
Wow.
And his son, Wyatt, is stamped right out of the same mold. I mean, he's probably, Wyatt's, I think, about 14 at this point, but he's already shot trophy class bucks, both with rifle and bow. Well, he's just, it's completely in his blood, and he is just relentless in terms of like, he'll sit there in a blind evening after evening, hour after hour until it happens.
Well,
yeah,
you get such an amazing view of the world.
Yeah,
that way. I was never a good bow hunter, but my son took it up, and he had these stories he would come home with. He was really young. He was successful. He killed whitetails, but does,
Yeah.
But he would come home with these stories about this 3-legged skunk that came by every day at the same time.
Right.
And these coyotes that would come by every day at the same time. They had they were running they were on an errand,
Yeah.
And it's the kind of thing that I can tell you, I see a lot of cool stuff, but because I don't sit.
Right.
I don't absorb the world in that same way at all.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the only time, I'm primarily my greatest enthusiasm in terms of field sports is definitely upland bird hunting. Yeah. But it's active. You're moving. You're
I'm
walking,
gonna run and gun, and I think that's what happened to me with elk. I mean, I was just hiking in the highest Bitterroots.
Yeah.
And killed an elk, and I'm like, wow, you don't have to sit.
Right.
And I learned from my son, and I learned from people in Alabama of the things you miss by having the run and gun life.
Yeah.
And I don't mean it's one thing better than another. I'm not trying to compare, but it was different.
Yeah.
It's totally different.
Yeah.
And I know people who are like amateur birders, really, from sitting in Alabama in blinds,
right,
or in tree stands.
Yep.
And then the real thing happens in the spring with turkey hunters who sit.
Yeah.
And there's just every bird on earth, right? It's coming through that neotropical stuff.
Yeah.
And you can't help but be overwhelmed by what you can get if you just sit still.
Yeah, it's
Which is what real old hunting, like those Kalahari Bushmen.
Sure.
And stuff, they sit at those water holes for days and days.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's something I'm too attention deficit for, but I admire it.
I'm more or less in the same boat, you know. I mean, I do decoy waterfowl, and,
me too.
And that requires pretty long-term sitting and often uncomfortable conditions. But even then, you can see some really neat things.
And I do have that, and especially when there's like not really very much ducks. There's not a lot of ducks going on, and you're just hanging out there maybe by yourself with your dog. Then I get it.
Yep.
Yeah. And you're kicked back, and you can drink coffee or whatever. Nothing's happening.
Right.
You can watch. I've seen cool stuff. Yeah. There you go. So I do have a window into it.
Yeah.
And from after all the ducks, like where I hunt, have long gone.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you're still out there hoping.
Still out there. Yep. Hope springs eternal.
Yeah, hope springs eternal. Right. So how did that lifestyle? We were just listening to your interview on NPR.
Yeah.
I think Montana NPR, and as kind of background for this, and that. She had some incredibly good questions. So how did that lifestyle bring you to, like, okay, so you were in the outdoor industry for a while and you were writing.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to get to where this begins.
Yeah. I mean, I've taken some, relatively long-term detours from carpentry. in Missoula. I worked when I was in college. I worked at the Axeman gun, at the Axeman. I mean, which is
tell them what it is, man. If you had never been to the Axeman,
it is a completely one of a kind sort of ranch and solar, alternate energy,
off-grid prepper, superstore.
Yeah, it's just an amazing place. I mean, they sell everything that you can think of, really, if you own a working farm or ranch.
And secondhand, a lot of it, too.
And then I believe it actually started out years and years ago, primarily as a sort of secondhand sort of pawn / junk, emporium, really. Right. But from there, I mean, it's evolved into something much beyond that at this point. And when I worked there, it had a really large gun shop that was stocked with pretty unique stuff. Yeah. And it was a fun place for me to work because I learned a lot about like high-end optics and, binoculars and scopes and
gotcha.
Yeah. And then got to be around a lot of really well done, but not particularly easily available, like European hunting rifles and things like that. And it was just a great education and a lot of fun. So I did that for a while, and then eventually I wound up doing script work and sort of consulting work for outdoor television programming, and did that for, I guess, just a year on a salaried basis, and then another couple of years on a freelance basis after I'd gone back to carpentry. It was sort of a sideline. And I worked on a number of different fly fishing shows, bird hunting shows, the Ducks Unlimited program that they sponsored. I worked on that quite a bit. And again, I mean, it was a great sort of, learning experience, and it's part of...
Did you go on the trips?
I did some, not the hunting one so much, but we did a target shooting show that we filmed at the range in Cody, Wyoming. And I had sort of invented a lot of the... It was before the Top Gun types or top shots or that kind of thing. It was prior to that. Yeah. And we had some sort of rudimentary moving targets. It was all hunting centric, and what we tried to do was emulate real world hunting situations. Wow. And
I'd watch that show.
Yeah, we had a panel of contestants, and it was supposed to have a host. And I was just supposed to be kind of the person who made sure that everybody got what the sort of logistical scenarios were for each station. But we didn't wind up having a host that was working out once we got, and so they threw me in front of the camera, and I wound up being the host of the thing for that was my that and one other.
Were you comfortable with that?
I actually was.
You were pretty good.
Yeah,
because it's something you knew about.
That's the thing. I mean, I knew the subject matter so well. I was the only person who really knew the subject matter relative to the actual game scenarios that we were expecting our contestants to sort of work through. So it was like I was the only option. And
is this after the Axeman gun counter?
It was after that, Yep.
I tell you, we were talking about earlier. I had to have. Yeah, I don't know if we talked, but I had to have met you at that time.
I'm sure we did
because we were sawing there, all along that 90 corridor. We were doing some work for White Pine and Sash. It was a timber company. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And we would come off of these private contracts, and then I would always stop at the Axeman to look at guns.
Yep.
And they have a chainsaw museum on the walls, and you can imagine handling these 75-pound 2-man chainsaws from the 1930s or something, 40s.
They've got all kinds of crazy stuff that they've accumulated over the years. They had a.
We're back to the Axeman now.
They had a World War I era ambulance that was made by Pierce Arrow. And I believe it's on display inside still. Yeah. It's been a couple of years since I was out there. But and just a lot of old-fashioned bicycles and all manner of collectible stuff that makes the place sort of one part museum and one part actual sort of retail.
You can spend a lot of time drifting around.
Oh, definitely.
When you were doing the Target show, and you were a host, and did that not? Was that not like you decided to move away from that, right?
Well, it was one of the. I mean, I had just started to write Painted Horses when we did that, and I had written several other novels or novel length manuscripts previously, trying to get it right enough to sort of break in to that world.
Yeah.
And I got to a point, I was in my, early 30s at that point, and I just told myself, I mean, it's time, I've got little kids at this point, and I told myself, I've got to just go big or go home here. And I, had been trying to write, was very, very influenced by Tom McGuane.
Yeah.
When I was in my 20s.
Yeah.
And as far as his early novels go, 92 in the Shade and the Sporting Club.
Sporting Club, yeah.
And that really just, black humor comic novels. And that's what I just wanted to be able to write that well and do that stuff so badly in my 20s.
I can't remember what came up yesterday when we were talking, but it reminded me of the Sporting Club immediately. And that original, I think that's his first novel, right?
It is, yeah.
So when did any of that stuff end up in Painted Horses that you were writing in those years, or?
Well, I had, like I said, when I got to a point where I'd written these sort of series of failed novels, and it just, it was almost like mimicry of, doing things that like Larry McMurtry and Tom McGuane and, those guys and Ken Kesey had done like years before.
Right.
And then I just I think I just grew up, basically. I had a couple of, young kids, and I was, in my early to mid 30s, and I started to just really reevaluate what my actual strengths as a writer might be. And I just sort of realized that the books that I read that really stuck to me were these more mythopoetic, romantic, epic, sort of novels like, The English Patient or
I know that. I mean, the reviewers didn't miss that when they were talking about Painted Horses. I read a lot of reviews of your book, and they didn't. It's Undache, right? How do you pronounce that?
Undache.
Undache, and that's The English Patient, which probably people had seen the movie. If you never read the book, it's really a great book.
It is.
And you were telling me you thought that was like really a model. But that's a long way from these darkly comic books that you started with.
Yeah, I mean, I had moved beyond.
You were different.
Yeah,
it's like the same river twice or whatever.
And I had moved on. From Tom McGuane, I learned about Jim Harrison and started to read him, and some of his books fit. He had so many different tones and voices that he could get into. But again,
Brown Dog, for instance.
Exactly. And Brown Dog is vastly different than Legends of the Fall, which is vastly different than, say, Dalva, But I just realized that you didn't really have to be a one-trick pony to be a writer. I mean, you could have multiple interests and multiple. And for instance, my next novel, Cloudmaker, which is, about a year out from maybe 6 months out from publication at this point, it's quite a bit different from Painted Horses, even though they share a common character.
Cormac McKee.
The figure of McKee, who was a minor character, supporting character in Painted Horses, is a more major character. But he's in Painted Horses partially to provide a little bit of comic relief. I mean, he's got sort of
he's awesome. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
And also, you got there's a great thing that Yakima McKee talks about in there, which is I hope people listening to this will try to see into how a work of art like this, and I ain't trying to get hoity-toity, but how a work of art like this comes to be.
Right,
like the obsessions of a human being rendered into a canvas that's like about like life.
Yeah,
which it's an amazing thing to do with your time.
Yeah,
with your obsessions as well. But Yakima McKee talks about John Browning, right?
Right.
And the gun designer, and he's obsessed with the 1911 pistol,
right? Because
they won't carry it locked in cock,
right? Yeah.
And
which is how Browning designed the thing to be.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And it makes everybody nervous,
right?
But John. He calls him John Moses. Was Browning really named Moses?
John Moses Browning.
John Moses Browning.
Yep.
Gotcha. And anybody who doesn't know that story, John Browning crossed the prairies with the original Latter-day Saints.
Right.
And if you Google up even a Wikipedia of John Browning, he was the most genius weapons designer.
Absolutely.
Probably of all time.
Probably of all time. Yeah. I think he was pretty much the preeminent arms designer.
Yeah. And you go back into these like designs and you find John Browning's like patent.
Yep. Hundreds of them.
And just, I mean, a handy fellow to have if you're going to try to establish a new civilization out in Salt Lake.
Yep. Yeah, and his father had been a gunsmith and a gun builder, but more in the traditional fashion. I mean, firearms technology was unbelievably rapid in the 19th century.
Right.
I mean, just beyond. I mean, you went into the century in, circa 1800 and they're still clamping a chunk of flint into the hammer of a flintlock and then relying on that to scrape sparks into a pan of gunpowder for your ignition.
Right.
Well, 100 years later, we have modern centerfire rifle cartridges that are still with us today that have never, that are still standard. It was just a remarkable century for the flourishing of design and technology.
Yeah. There's probably a metaphor there somewhere of like the good and the bad of any kind of thing.
Oh, absolutely.
You think of the
life is paradox.
Life is paradox. Yeah. I was just doing this piece on trying to get this history done, and it was this attack on the village of Malbia in Alabama, by the DeSoto expedition.
Yeah,
and they were using arquebuses, or they call them harquebus.
Sure.
And I think you'd light a fuse.
Yeah, it had it was like a matchlock.
A matchlock. And they were so heavy that you usually carried shooting sticks.
Right.
But with people standing side by side shooting this 3.5 ounce ball for 450, 500 yards.
Right.
It was devastating.
Right.
I mean, it was a technological explosion.
Oh, yeah.
For the people on the receiving end.
Yeah, it's sort of a mini cannon, really.
It's like a mini cannon, hand carried.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a long way from that to the Browning machine gun of World War I.
World War I was the BAR. Yeah, the BAR. He invented that, but then he invented sort of carrier-mounted guns too. And I'm not, to be honest with you, I'm not. It's that dimension of his design. Au revoir is not, for lack of a better word, is not stuff that I'm super familiar with off the top of my head. I mean, I have a sort of a general sense of a lot of it, but it's more the sort of sporting arms. And then the 1911 pistol is obviously such a complete landmark and such an iconic, pistol that I'm pretty closely familiar with.
That's why it went into the book, right?
Yeah.
So I was, one of the things we talked about on this podcast before is like there are not that many novelists who really know guns,
right?
And that's not a value judgment. It's just like that it doesn't happen that much that you find an epic novel where the people are the guns are it's a big part of it,
right?
And also, this has been called a horse centric book as well, painted horses, and you have this childhood years of working with horses.
Yeah, my grandparents were farmers and always had horses. My mom was the sort of classic horse crazy, girl, Elizabeth Taylor in National Velvet or whatever.
Yeah.
And as a result of that, I had a really early introduction to it. And
that was Pennsylvania and New Jersey, right?
Yeah, correct. Yeah, that's where my extended family, much of them still live.
Gotcha.
But in especially at the time, relatively rural areas, it was mainly farm country.
Right.
Then when we moved, my family, immediate family, moved to Northern California. El Dorado County is also a real sort of hot spot for endurance trail riding. So there were tons of people who had, Arabian endurance horses, and I was lucky enough I never owned one, but I was lucky enough to live right next to people who had them and needed their horses exercised. So I got to ride a lot, on somebody else's dime.
Yeah, right. Pretty cool.
Yeah, very cool.
So these the way this life works. So at some point, you're in your early 30s. You got kids.
Yeah.
You're employed.
Yep.
And so, and you just, and you decide to write this giant novel, which would take you how many years?
Well, I was hoping I could do it in 2 years, mostly sort of spending a lot of concentrated writing time in the winters when the carpentry would taper off.
Yeah.
But it actually took me 5 years of doing that to get a complete draft of it.
And then how much reworking and over, like beyond that?
To be honest with you, not all that much. I think in its published form, it's probably about 90% of what the original draft was.
Well,
yeah.
Was a lot of it cut, or was it?
There were a handful of cuts, but what we actually did was add to Catherine's story some. My editor is a wonderful, wonderful woman who's almost like a sister to me at this point. Her name is Amy Hundley, and she was also Jim Harrison's editor.
Well,
yeah,
you're in good company.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And and it was great to have a female editor, especially for Painted Horses, because half of the narrative is told from a woman's point of view. Right. And that, when I got into the book, I initially intended to have the whole thing be told from John H.'s point of view. Uh-huh. And I knew there was going to be a love interest, a female character. I mean, a woman who was an archaeology grad student. But then the more I started to try to map it all out on the front end, I realized that if I was going to tell the most complete human story that I could, which entailed this sort of coming of age story with Catherine, in which she not only falls in love with archaeology and the past, but she falls truly in love with someone for the first time.
Right.
And I knew that if I was going to tell that story and have it be as powerful as it, actually is for people in real life, that I needed to give her just as much of a stake and just as much of a voice and a perspective as I did John H.
Yeah.
Which immediately opened up this whole can of worms problem for me, because I was like, if I really fail to do a good job at that, writing from a female point of view, the book is going to be collecting dust in a drawer. It won't work.
Right.
So
was that terrifying?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, it was a gamble.
Did you read I know from women readers that I've considered very astute people, that they have criticisms of Dalva as a kind of over idealized woman that this is Jim Harrison's book, Dalva.
Right. Yep.
But Catherine LeMay in your book is not. I mean, she's a person, a human being.
Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, I personally marveled at how that. I mean, I don't need to. You don't need to give me the sausage. Maker, but I'm personally marveled at how that's done, because she also has a kind of exploratory lover early on that just doesn't work out at all, and it's such a true to life experience for all of people. That it's like a trial run. It's not particularly pleasant. The guy is not particularly great.
Right.
And then she becomes this person, self-realized person.
Yeah.
I don't know if this is
thank
planned.
you.
I don't know if this is planned out, but her journey into Bighorn Canyon, which is this labyrinth, in search of archaeological knowledge before they make Yellowtail Dam and stop it up forever.
Right. Yeah.
I'm going to let you tell about what the book is. But
I guess the only thing I'd like to, somewhat, interject with is you are right. It is. Yellowtail Dam and Bighorn Canyon is the model for the dam and the canyon in the book. But because what I'm writing about is so highly fictionalized in terms of the principal character, real life characters who were involved in that particular project, I never name the canyon or the dam in the manuscript.
I got you.
So because there were real archaeologists who really went down in there and did not experience what Catherine experiences.
She didn't find John H. in a cave.
Exactly.
Well, I get you. I get you. So, and it's a landscape of the imagination too.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I think it's fascinating. on an archetypal level, you know, as people descend into the earth in search of this. I mean, a theme in the book that never stops is simply time.
Right.
You know, and the handprints on the horses that John H is also an artist.
Right.
And will you give me a little synopsis of what you created here, if you don't mind?
Well, I mean, I definitely had the idea of archetypes and heroic archetypes in mind when I conceived of him. And I had been really, really fascinated to the point of obsession by the Ice Age cave art in Europe for a long time. It was something, and there was something about, and remains something about those images that is so instantly eerie and instantly striking and instantly identifiable, even though they're of extinct animals, you know, and they're done in this, the best of them, at least. I mean, the ones that are really famous are famous because they conform to this pattern. They're just so exquisitely painted by a consciousness and a capability that is exactly modern and identical to our own. Yeah. But these things are, you know, as much as 40,000 years old, and they're sealed against the ravages of time underground. Right. And I was just so consumed with the idea that sensibility that could produce that kind of vivid, almost stare into the abyss type art is still with us in the modern human psyche and compulsion to create art. Yeah. And I just loved it that, you know, it was a hunting culture, you know, a hunter-gatherer, but primarily hunter culture. I mean, these guys are living on the edge of an ice sheet, you know, and they're figuring out how to both pursue these now extinct animals that they were utterly reliant upon for their own survival, while at the same time memorializing them in this art that they created. And it was something about that hunting hand-eye magic, create and record and make something really comprehensively beautiful that is still comprehensively beautiful to us in the present day, when our lives and our circumstances are so vastly different. But we can look at those things and somehow still some part of the human psyche sees ourselves in those people, and their handprint on the wall could be our handprint today. Yeah. And so I had this fascination with deep time and the way that those people created the modern human psyche in a way. Yep. And I wanted John H. to be this kind of emblematic character who essentially moves through time in a way. And he's still, when he goes into the cave in France himself, he immediately identifies the horses that he himself has been creating on canvas or on rocks or whatever in the American West as an instinctual gesture, and he realizes that he's a part of this huge continuum of human experience. Nice, yeah, that's cool. And to give some background on this, so John H. he's a castaway really as a child, right? And he lands, he jumps off the train, and injures himself permanently, really, with the knee problem. But he's in the horse cavalry. It's World War II. Correct. And he has been with the Basque people who kind of took him in. Mm-hmm. And then he ends up seeing some of the Basque country. Right. But the continuum there also is the horse cavalry from the very moment of his awakening as a person. Mm-hmm. He's in the thoroughbred horses, and he's off the train in the West again with the horses. Right. And that continuum. But I know you answered this question before, not with me, but the horse cavalry was something you discovered that was in World War II that also brought you to some of this story, right? Right. I mean, the real sort of flashpoint genesis of the novel was a a bit of a fluke of a information tidbit that I happened upon when I was probably 20 or so. My dad and I were doing remodel work for an older guy who was a retired guy. He was a retired horse vet in Northern California, and he took a shine into me because he realized that I liked horses, and he had structured his whole life around doctoring horses, and I think he had grown up on a ranch himself. So he would just kind of hang out with me while we were working, and just talk to me. And at one point, he said, I was in the last U.S. mounted U.S. cavalry unit in World War II.
Wow.
And I was already, even at that point, I was already like watching World War II documentaries and reading about World War II and just fascinated like so many people are. And I had never heard that there was horse-mounted U.S. soldiers in World War II. It was in Italy. And so it was difficult to actually research that later, but I did tuck it into the back of my head that this guy had told me he had been part of this effort. So once I got to the time to go big or go home as a writer, and I'm going to try writing an epic, I mean, that popped right up, and I was like, I need to learn more about that, because that's something that I have never read about in a generalized history of World War II. Right. And I've certainly never encountered it in a novel or in fiction. And what I was really interested in doing was trying to take a lot of these disparate interests that I had and put them into a novel, because I wasn't seeing those things explored in contemporary fiction.
Right.
Both, like that, the U.S., ad hoc U.S. horse cavalry was one. Basque culture in the West was another. The post-Blitz archaeology in London. I mean, just these things that I had sort of, been really interested in for years and years, but wanted to know more about, and also wanted to see how they all connected together, because they clearly did inside of my own psyche. And
now that I've read your book, they connect, right?
Right.
Before that, like the disparate nature of these topics, right? And I would never have seen that, right?
Right.
Which is kind of the beauty of reading a novel of this breadth.
Sure.
Catherine LeMay is in London studying the. Is it Roman stuff?
Yeah,
that's uncovered by the Nazi bombs.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that whole scenario with the temple and everything, that was a real excavation, and it's an extremely critical moment in what's called salvage archaeology. Yeah, because there's an excellent website on the Walbrook excavation and the Temple of Mithras, but.
And this is in modern day. It's under London, right?
It is under London. Yeah, and it's. I could kind of briefly go into that a little bit. What happened in this particular situation? They were attempting to, these teams of archaeologists working for the London Museum under a guy named William F. Grimes. Okay. He was a Welsh archaeologist, and he was the director of these digs where in the bomb craters in London, and the clock was ticking. They only had, it was a while. They had 10 or 12 years, whatever, because it took forever to get everything cleaned up and get London, the parts.
Right, they wanted to rebuild the city.
Exactly. So they didn't have unlimited time, and they were just trying to triage this situation and figure out, all right, we want to learn certain things about like the original fortification around the Roman fortification around the original city of London. And we can now we have a window into the past because the bombs have, knocked down all the Victorian era buildings. So they're doing that kind of thing. And then they wanted to know something, these lost rivers that flow underneath of London into the Thames. And they're lost because they've been built over centuries. And one of them that was really critical and shows up on old maps is called Walbrook. And one of these bombs landed in a spot that they could excavate down through the shell of these buildings and try to determine something about the nature of the Walbrook stream. And while they're in the process of doing that, they encounter this Roman structure. And it turns out to be this temple. And they didn't even know, they had no intention of continuing on and investigating the temple structure per se. They knew it was a religious structure, but they thought it was probably like early Christian. Mm. And then on the last day that they had to sort of dig in this particular site, they pop up the statue's head. And it was this, and they could tell by the cap on his head that he was a Persian god named Mithras. That there was a cult of, a Mithraic cult amongst Roman soldiers.
Oh, wow.
And so somebody happened to be, like a Times reporter or something, happened to be standing around. Again, this is the last day. There's bulldozers waiting.
What is our date here?
This is in 1954. Okay, when this happened. It was September or October. And they've got this, utterly eerie-looking severed statue's head. And a reporter happened to be there, took a picture of it, and they ran it as a human interest piece in the Sunday Times. And the public reaction to the fact that they were going to doze the site without doing more excavations was so intense that, it was like discussed by Winston Churchill and the parliamentary cabinet and whatnot. And they basically gave a brief stay of execution to this particular site and allowed them to really do a more or less full tilt excavation to a degree. And so that's part of I make that into part of Catherine's backstory. But it was a very, very significant moment in urban archaeology, because developers and whatnot realized that if the public could get too fired, there were 30,000 Londoners per day queuing up to see this thing before, and there was a huge hue and cry about how much of our heritage and our historical record and our background do we want to sacrifice for modern progress? Wow. And it would just opened up this existential can of worms. Okay. And it wouldn't necessarily be something that, your sort of average archaeology, contemporary archaeology buff doesn't necessarily really remember this particular event, but at the time it had enormous implications.
Right.
Yeah.
And it put kind of archaeology in people's minds.
Yep. Very much so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is, we talk about this sometime when I'm working in southern Idaho. The Bennett Hills used to be this huge sagebrush steppe, know, and it's burned off not that long ago. And now it's this dun-colored cheatgrass landscape. Sure. People who are coming through there, it's beautiful. Right. And there's no recognition that not only is it, as Aldo Leopold would say, it's a world of wounds. Right. But all that has been lost. Right. But the people who are now walking there, it's kind of like a Cormac McCarthy ending or something. They don't see what's lost or what's gone. And we've built a city like London is built over thousands of years of people's of human endeavors. Yeah. And I was thinking about when Boudica, the Celtic warrior princess, queen. Yep. They burned London. Yep. Yeah,
and that's why they built the Roman fortified city with the wall around it. When they rebuilt it, was because that particular event had basically devastated this frontier outpost that they had. So they kind of came back.
They killed her, right? Yeah,
and that was sort of like the blitz of its day.
Gotcha.
So they fortified against it, but then 2,000 years later, you've got our contemporary, World War II blitz, airplanes, right. and V rockets and whatnot.
Yeah, no more walls.
Right.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, wild, huh?
Well, yeah, and you carry this. Again, I go back to the concept of big time, long time, but
deep time.
But you carry Catherine LeMay from that's her proven ground,
right?
And then she gets hired to evaluate the archaeological resources of this canyon that's to be flooded,
right?
Again, to cover up, using progress to cover up. And there is an incredible. I'm talking to you like you didn't write it, but there's an incredible meditation on progress versus human relic. Yeah. Towards we're late in the book, and I'm not throwing any spoilers in this one. Yeah. Because I highly recommend that people take this book on a summer vacation or on a quarantine or throw it in the truck as I did and while I was fishing. Yeah, and at night I would sit there and read it, and it's an experiential book.
Thank you.
Where you carry this thing with you.
Well, one of the biggest consistent compliments that I've gotten is some variation of this. For a book that has like really like undeniable literary standards, it's also extremely entertaining.
Yeah, right. It's fun.
And that makes me happy because I don't want to write to some kind of standard that to me, art really should, especially narrative art, really should entertain on the front end.
You bet.
And it should frankly seduce the reader. Okay.
Yeah.
And the way that you do that is, I think you try to write something that is going to engage a reader and recreate that feeling you can have if you're a reader as a kid. Those times when you get so utterly lost in a narrative that people can be yelling at you, the dinner's going cold on the table, and you can't even hear them.
Yeah, or you can't wait to get back. Yeah, like you're somewhere and you think about that book.
I know.
I remember that, the weirdest, big print biography of James Fenimore Cooper.
Yeah,
talk about being a nerd.
Yeah,
and I was like 8.
Yeah.
And I was like, I just had to, he lived this very adventurous life.
Oh, yeah.
I just had to get back to know what was going to happen to him next,
Yeah.
So, and this book, I tell you, the other thing that this book is if you're tired of being wherever you're at, Jim Harrison, always used to say, I always start with a journey.
Yeah.
Because everybody's sick of where they're at, pretty much, if they pick up your book,
Yeah.
And this book takes place in such widely disparate parts of the world,
right?
And very very logically so. Like he's in the horse cavalry, and then he's back into the Basque country, which you never imagined he would see.
When I was writing the thing, I mean, aspects of it, such as that, used to just make me wake up in a cold sweat at night at times, and I would just think,
I've lost control.
I would think, what is this? I mean, is this going to make any logical, coherent sense, or am I just on a complete wild goose chase?
That must have been tough.
It was. Yeah. And there were times when I'd have to be away from it, but really for months at a time, when the carpentry season was really, going. I mean, I couldn't spend a lot of time on the manuscript, and I would get, a few weeks or a month's distance from it and just be like, you're out of your mind. This is, you're going to go back and reread this with a set of fresh eyes and burn it. I never did. I'd go back to it, and before I knew it, I was reading the stuff that I had written several months earlier. And I just wanted to keep reading, and there was those moments that kept me, kept me going.
Right.
And,
Hey, this is Hal Herring, Backcountry Hunters and Anglers Podcast and Blast. Thanks for being here. Thanks for joining us. They asked me to call out for membership, looking for new members, looking for people that want to join up, have a good time, and fight for America's public lands. This is a good time to do it. It's $35 a year. For that, you get a $25 T-shirt. You can check that out, backcountryhunters.org/BHA podcast. Backcountryhunters.org/BHA podcast will show you what we got, what we're offering. And part of that is, beyond a T-shirt, you get a subscription to Backcountry Journal, which is one of the better magazines coming out on hunting and fishing on public lands in America right now. It's beautiful writing, beautiful photos. And partially also you can see that membership at BHA is part of a powerful movement that's necessary, but it's also part of having a really good time with people like mine. Go to backcountryhunters.org/BHA podcast. Check it out and join us if you can. We're going to have a good time, and we have been having a good time, and we're going to have a lot more of it. Come on in. See ya. At what point in this did you understand that you had a book? Or did you launch this project with a do or die
it was do or die?
Yeah, I think, the Spanish burning the ships.
Yeah, and I don't. I mean, Missoula is known for its community of writers and whatnot, but I exist somewhat outside of that, to be honest with you. I mean, I do have I have lots of friends who are writers in Missoula, but I stayed pretty quiet about this thing during the 5 years I was working on it, and once I got it done, I knew, or had a complete draft rather, and I knew that the thing to do now is try to get a literary agent. So I tried that with some sort of, your typical query letter process.
Yeah.
Writing to people who are long distance and, probably sent out over 100 queries to different agents. And out of that, I had maybe 10 or a dozen requests to read sort of parts of it, like the first 3 chapters or whatever, that kind of thing. So, that was about 4 or 5 month process probably. And nobody was, I had unanswered queries out there yet, but nobody was like jumping right up to, sign me on. So I thought, well, maybe I'll try going to a writer's conference where there are actually some representatives there.
Where you can meet somebody.
FaceTime.
Right.
And,
Yeah,
have
for
a conversation with
sure.
somebody. It's not just coming out of a slush pile through the mail or whatever.
Yeah.
So I wound up going, we tried to truncate this a little bit, but I wound up going down to the Jackson Hole Writers Conference sort of on a last minute basis. And you could, for that, you could pay in advance to have samples of your work critiqued by instructors at the conference. And I was assigned to a lady named Tina Welling, who I just, to this day, I just am utterly grateful to her. She wrote some like natural history, nature, memoir stuff, and also I guess what you would term in a marketing sense like category women's fiction.
Yeah.
So I sent her the first 50 pages to critique, and I paid some, I don't know what it was, $50 or $100, something like that.
Yeah.
And I was glad that it was a lady that I was assigned to, because what I really wanted to know is, does the Catherine character work?
Right. And was this early Catherine character, or was she a bigger part of she was already a bigger part of the book?
Yeah, the whole thing, the whole manuscript was done at that point.
Gotcha.
And it, like I said, it was probably about 90% of what it turned out to be.
Yeah.
Okay. So I drive down to Jackson, and she comes up to me at the first evening's meet and greet where you're wearing the "Hi, my name is Malcolm" name tag and whatnot. Yeah. She said, "Hi, I'm Tina, and I read your." She goes, "I am really eager to talk to you about this, but we need to do it where we can have a real conversation." And because she said, "I don't want to keep you from any of the other sort of events and things. Can you meet me at 6:00 tomorrow morning in this bagel shop?" And I said, "Yeah, absolutely." So I did, and we sit down, and she said, "First of all, can I ask you what your intentions for coming to this conference are?" And I said, "Well, to be honest with you, it's not really to learn about craft or technique." I said, I already have. I've written a couple of complete manuscripts. This one I feel pretty good about. What I need to know is confirmation that it's publishable. Yeah. And then I need to figure out how to break into the publishing world. Yeah. And she said, "Well, I'm glad to hear you say that, because," and I get super choked up whenever I talk about this, but she said, "I'm glad to hear you say that, because I can't tell you any way to make this better. But what I can do is introduce you to people." Wow. And I sat there and started crying. Yeah. Because that was the moment that I knew that it was it was a real thing. Yeah. Yeah. Right.
This thing that you had spent 5 years. Yeah. And literally the probably broken your back on the writing of it.
Yeah. 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 I tried to make the thing as polished and as.
Wow, that's a great story.
Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. It's yeah, and you don't win that. You don't win. That's the end result of a journey. Yeah, and a journey of toil and and overcoming doubt.
Yeah, it was, like I said, I got into kind of a do or die mode with it at the front end of it. And then once I'd gotten, I guess the other thing and now that I'm thinking back, and this is years ago that I wrote this, but I had saved up enough money on the front end to, I think, finance 2 months of writing just to get myself going on it. And I wrote the first probably about 100 pages in that 2 month period. But
you were 35 at that time?
I was 35. Yeah. And just at the last sequence of it that I wrote during that 2 month period was the first John H. flashback sequence, where where his father cracks up and he's placed into foster care and winds up running away, and winds up out west. And I wrote that in a maybe 2-day blitz. I mean, rare for me because we were talking about this earlier, but I'm not a big, huge word count at one sitting guy as a rule. But that one, it had like percolated in my head, and I got so into the story myself that I just cranked it out. And there's very little interiority in there. It's just all. It's like Legends of the Fall, I guess, or like, all the pretty horses where it's just action, and it was a great way to speed right through it. And after I finished it, I sat down and reread that sequence to myself, and I was just like, I know I'm going to keep going with this because I'm really proud of this part of it.
And this person this character deserves to go somewhere. For sure. That's really cool. And boy, does he go! That's like,
he was a fun character to create and try to breathe life into, animate.
And you have so we were talking earlier this morning, drinking coffee, but that you have an addiction, and you explained a little bit of this before, but you have a true belief that art, a novel like this, like we were talking about the so-called, I'm doing air quotes or whatever, cheesier novel like Bridges of Madison County, right? And you said, there's a reason that Clint Eastwood made that into a movie. And the reason is that the book is pretty damn good.
Right.
And it doesn't matter that it sold X billion copies and was on the, whatever. It is romance. It is romantic. And these experiences are part of our lives. Because falling in love with somebody and having that work out or not are some of the most powerful experiences a human being has.
Right. And they're curiously absent from a lot of contemporary, quote unquote serious fiction. And just the notion of like the old archetypal psychological models that, I'm sorry, there's a reason that they cross cultures, and there's a reason that people identify with the narrative of the hero's journey, say. They resonate in the human psyche for reasons, having to do probably with, our mythological structures and whatnot. And just there's something very, very resonant about those old-fashioned, often sort of romanticized, epic sorts of dimensions to a narrative. I guess it's mythopoetics.
It is. It's what it is drawing from the longings of the human heart.
Exactly.
And in this and the sexuality in this book is like, it's also like, it's really, really well done. I'll tell you, but it's also it's a big part of it because it's a big part of people's lives.
Right.
And in the book where she finally meets John H. and all, those things are very they're hard won for all these characters too. John H. is a solitary man,
right?
And has been like I think Leonard Cohen said one time, he's like the famous womanizer. And he said, and the people who say this about me have never really thought about the 10,000 nights I spent alone. And the 10,000 days I spent in here.
Right.
Sometimes writing a song, he said, and sometimes not.
He
said, but it's a beautiful Leonard Cohen quote. But that John H. is a solitary human being. Catherine LeMay, by dint of her kind of drive, is a solitary person. And then when they meet, and it's a very powerful thing. Because it's not tossed off, and she's not back at home where there's lots of men jumping around.
Right.
So I just think that's another part of the heroic journey that also is missing from so much of fiction.
I know. And just like the idea of sort of a coming of age story at this point, and that's partially what I wanted with Catherine, to give her this sort of like coming into adulthood with all of the beauty and all of the terror and all of the tragedy and the whole thing, but it's not all terror and tragedy all the time. I mean, there's some really beautiful dimensions to being a live human being walking around on the face of the planet.
Right.
And I just, so much fiction, I mean, at this point seems to fall into, I guess, if it's sort of highbrow, literary fiction, falls into one of two categories. I mean, it's either about existential ennui, which, to me translates to bored characters doing boring things and having boring lives.
Right.
And somehow this is supposed to be, a powerful meditation on something. Or on the other side of the coin, the relentlessly grim narrative in which it's just sort of, you're just sort of in a trough of one horribly grim circumstance. And, people doing awful things to one another with no redemption, no notion of transcendence at all, and the grimness itself is supposed to be a stand-in for seriousness.
Right.
And I just don't see that those are genuinely representative of the multifaceted lives that we actually all live.
Right.
And I really wanted to create a story in which the characters have some tragedy in their lives and some real adversity and stuff that they've, really got to challenge themselves with and try to transcend, but also show these like lighter moments with the way that people actually insulate themselves from all of that stuff, with pathos and with comedy and with lust and, and with ambition and with drive and with,
There's some great scenes in there where they go back to town when she's with Miriam, she's a Crow, Native American, with her father, for instance, those are and the imagery in there is before we'll let people have the book, right?
Yeah,
but when you're working on this, and obviously you're working in a tradition of very lyrical, descriptive, very detailed writing.
Yeah.
And back when I revisited the book this morning, I was noticing that the details of it are just it's very lifelike. But
thank you.
But you're working in a tradition of lyrical, deep, heavy, descriptive writing.
Yeah, I mean, I have a romantic's heart, definitely.
Yeah,
and I mean, I'm an enormous fan of rock and roll, especially in its high stage with when the Rolling Stones we're doing Beggar's Banquet and all those records from 68 to 72 or 73, which are just so emblematic of that entire form. They didn't miss a note, and there's just but what they were neo-romantics. That rock and roll came straight out of romantic literature.
Yeah,
and
interesting.
And I think that there's a reason that it resonated and became this soundtrack for so many people in a really volatile world.
Right.
Because there's something about that sensibility that, again, I mean, it just resonates with people on some deep psychological level.
Well, look at the working in the, speaking of working in the long tradition,
Yeah.
So like I was reading this short biography of Huddy Ledbetter, Leadbelly.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And the Rolling Stones took that, and then those songs are nothing if not the desires of the human heart made manifest in tune.
Oh yeah, definitely.
And here are the Rolling Stones, Beggar's Banquet in particular. But here is everybody. I was listening to the Ozark Mountain Daredevils too, and that comes off of church music.
Yeah.
There's The Beauty in the River. And Roll Away the Stone. I'm trying to remember the name of that song, but I was listening to it and I was like, this is church music done by these wild, long-haired people from the hills.
Yeah.
And they simply are bringing it in working in the long tradition.
Yeah, definitely.
And that's an interesting thing because your book works in a long tradition.
Yeah, thank you.
I mean, you're playing the long game of literature. And it's different. It's not that these other genres can't be great too.
Sure,
I love flash fiction. I love short stories.
Yeah, absolutely.
I like punk rock. I love Fear. That band and Black Flag and all that stuff.
Sure.
But it's not the same thing.
No.
And thank God it's not. Right.
Yeah. I mean, God, talking about song like Leonard Cohen, who I love. I mean, Bob Dylan is probably my hero. but talking about the power of like sentiment and sentimentality, and it's still much more acceptable in music, it seems like, than it is in like, because is there anybody on the planet who doesn't think Lucinda Williams is just like an absolutely, top notch?
It's channeling something.
Yes, I mean she's like a conduit from God as a songwriter, But I mean, when you start to listen to so much of her work, that song where she says, he had a reason to get back to Lake Charles.
Yep. Right.
In a yellow El Camino, listening to Howlin' Wolf.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's so vivid, and the heartbreak in that song for this person that she loves so much.
There's some universality there.
Yes, there is.
That's mine in a deep vein.
Yeah, definitely.
Right. I love that Car Wheels on a Gravel Road as well.
Yep.
On that idea of lying in the back seat listening to the patter of that gravel, right?
I know it.
Everybody knows it.
You bet.
Even people who've never done it.
Yeah, no, and it's that like unbelievable ability to just distill human experience and human emotion,
and then to bring it.
Yeah, with a single great line.
Yeah. So it's so you've moved like this book. It was this book was successful. I mean, that's what we're talking about. It paid back its advance. It sold. It was people were loving it.
Yeah,
and,
it's got its detractors, which is fine.
I'm sure,
but but I mean the experience that
Lucinda Williams has her detractors as well.
Well, there you go. The Stones do.
You're right, for sure. But this was I interviewed lots. I talked to lots of writers.
Yeah,
and but this as a successful novel, first novel, is a very rare thing.
Yeah, I know, and I have to put a lot of that on my publisher. It's Grove Atlantic is the publishing house, and the head honcho there is a fairly legendary figure named Morgan Entrican, and he published Jim Harrison from probably about 1980 on. Or 82 on. He published all of it, and then he bought a lot of his back catalog from prior to that, and continues to publish it. And Morgan just was really supportive of Painted Horses and supportive of me as a writer, and that whole house. I mean, everybody at Grove was really responsible for the way that it was distributed and marketed and gotten out there on a so I got to give credit to them, honestly. And
you do a long book tour?
I did 25 cities, which is pretty unusual in this, I don't think anyone's doing book tours at the moment.
Virtual book tours.
Exactly.
That's gotta hurt.
Yeah, but Painted Horses came out in 2014, and, even at that point, a really big book tour for a first novel was pretty unusual. But it was just a wonderful experience, though.
Mm-hmm. And now you've just put another one in the can.
Yeah, it's scheduled at the moment to be published next March. And and there's a little bit of overlap between Painted Horses and Cloudmaker. I mean, and its general tone and it's much more picaresque.
You're trying to do what you started out to do.
A little bit. I mean, it's got epic dimensions to it, but it's got probably quite a bit more in terms of just page. It's about kids it's inspired by these real teenage kids in the Great Depression who were building and flying their own airplanes around Muscle Shell Valley and Roundup, Montana.
Wow.
Yeah, Rygate, Montana.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's inspired by that.
In the 30s.
In the 30s.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I tried to approach it as though Mark Twain were putting his boy heroes into the early age of aviation rather than the antebellum South on the Mississippi. So I try to take that as sort of a cue and work with it a little bit.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
I'm going to do something I can do because it's my podcast. I'm going to drop back and ask you a question about Painted Horses.
Yeah.
What brought you? What made you Larry Brown, you and I both share a reverence for his work. Yep. And Larry Brown was asking a book called Father and Son.
Yeah.
and they said, why did you set it in 1950 something? You know, and Larry Brown had an incredible answer for that, because part of it was laziness. He said, I don't want the technology. I don't know anything about this stuff. He said, I can't fix a modern car.
Yeah.
And he said, there's some part of me, even though he wasn't very old.
Right.
He said, there's some part of me that's stuck in the 1950s, and I can write that.
Yeah.
But you have a reason that I heard in an interview, and one of it was a transition from to the Wild West.
Right.
And that you have, as we discussed, you have a deep relationship with the myths of the Western frontier and all that. And so you said, tell me something about setting this book in the 1950s and why.
Right. Well, I mean, the 50s were such a transitional age in a lot of ways. I mean, technology being one of them. I mean, we were getting the highway systems, and suddenly, the idea, but at the same time, that there was the space race, started up then, and the idea of like nuclear proliferation was sort
uranium
of
mining,
in its infancy. And meanwhile, the Army Corps of Engineers is building these huge dams out west, but at the same time, there was this real yearning for, I mean, the TV Western, I mean, there was this real yearning for the frontier past. Yeah. Brought to people's living rooms through this brand new high-tech medium of the television set. Yeah. And it was just and it was also an interesting time for women in the United States, because, there had been this era back in the 20s and 30s where there were the Flappers, and there was Amelia Earhart, and there was Bessie Coleman, and these women who were flying airplanes and doing sort of adventurous things with quite a bit of independence, really. Yeah. And then we have World War II, and after that, it's like things ratcheted back a little bit.
It was like trying to put Rosie the Riveter back into the kitchen.
Back in the apron. Yep. I mean, that's kind of what happened. And so it sort of had to jumpstart itself again a little bit. And, there was this expectation, especially if you came from a certain social set, for a woman that, I mean, it was a sign of class to go be college educated, but it should be in something like music or, and then what you're really going to do is, be a domestic homemaker. And
what's that movie, Julia Roberts, where she's a teacher in that women's college?
I don't know.
Oh man, it's really, really good. And she realizes that that's what they're all expected. She's teaching like the classics, and she's like she's really into it. And that's what it's about. Yeah. And it's very, I can't remember the name of it, but that's what it's about. Yeah. She realizes suddenly that she's like supposed to be, they tell her. Yeah. They're not, none of them are going to do that. Right. And she's like, oh yeah. Yeah. So were you cognizant of that with Catherine's character in the 50s?
Yeah, definitely. And, I tried to read a bunch of sort of like actual 50s era stuff, like women's magazines and whatnot, just to kind of get a little bit of a sense of, and it was, I was writing it years before, like, say, Mad Men was on television, so I didn't have that as a reference point, really. But then once I saw it, and I think I was probably already finished with Painted Horses, or nearly so, by the time that show initially aired. And it was confirmation for me that, I had sort of hit something accurately and set it in the correct era to tell that kind of story. Right.
Yeah. And also, I think that her character very much with Mad Men out. Yeah. The United States, the reading public was also, they were ready for that. Yeah.
Yeah. That's true.
I was just reading this, trying to do some background reading with some old Stegner. The Sound of Mountain Water. Yeah, uh-huh. And he has this incredible passage of going through this coulee out in the desert, and the uranium this is in the 50s. Right. The uranium trucks and all of these just like these 10 extractive industries going on at once, and everybody expecting that. Yeah. I think, I don't know if it was Devoto called the West the pillaged province. Right. The pillaged province. Yeah. Yeah. And Stegner picks up on that in that chapter. Yeah.
Well, I mean, the West in general, and by the 50s, I think it had just really started to become obvious, but it really is a place of high paradox.
Yeah.
You've got on the one hand, just the archetypal notion of like pushing onto a frontier that's unspoiled,
Yep.
unfenced, and unowned, and we've got this, like everything is like a Bierstadt painting, and it's
right.
just this like incredible grandeur and wonderful light, but at the same time, you've got Butte and the Berkeley pit and the pit was they were starting to create that in the 1950s.
Yep.
But prior to that, I've done a fair amount of research on Butte because I think it's an incredibly fascinating place, and it is definitely like embodies a lot of the paradox of the idea of an Irish immigrant like Marcus Daly learning sort of the boots on the ground mining stuff and the Comstock lode in Nevada, and then making his way to Butte when it's just a minuscule little camp on the side of a hill, and having this sort of crystal ball to see that all this copper that's in that ground there is about to be really useful.
Because like we were talking about last night, the electrification of America. The building of the aluminum required the conduit to carry the electricity to make the aluminum to make the B-17. I mean, and Daly, of course, was way before that, but he was the vision.
Yeah.
And you ever been to his house down the Bitterroot? Up the Bitterroot, I guess you up.
Daly Mansion.
Yeah. And so he placed that so that you leave the pits and the toxic runoff and the well, I'm not saying it's all human misery either, because people were making good money. That's why everybody was there.
Yeah, totally.
But it's a wild.
Well, yeah, and it's such a crazy place because they used to have to print the official mine signage down inside the mines in 17 different languages because there were so many people from all over the world who had come there to do that work.
Yeah. 17 different languages in one place,
including like Arabic and whatnot.
Right.
I mean, it was which is just mind-boggling to think about that in 1885 or 1890.
Yeah, they had great food, I was told.
I'm sure they did.
And that was. But I was thinking about when Daly went home to the mansion, he stood on that thing and saw the Albert Bierstadt.
Yeah,
which is the incredible array of the Bitterroot Canyons, right?
Yep.
From Blodgett to say Bear Creek was his view.
Yeah.
And so it's that you talk about paradox.
I know.
Over here, you're blowing up the Continental Divide itself.
Absolutely.
And then coming home to this mansion where you stand and are enlivened with the grandeur of landscape.
Yeah.
Unreal, man.
I know, it's totally unreal. And I mean, and sort of themes like that. I mean, the idea of paradox in the Western frontier experience was definitely big in my mind when I wrote Painted Horses. I mean, and this question of how much do we inevitably destroy exactly what we love. And by the same token, if we know we have a tendency to destroy what we love, at what point do we start asking ourselves hard questions about what do we do to not destroy exactly the reason that we're standing here trying to embrace this thing?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. John F. Lacey, who wrote the Antiquities Act, in the proclamation, sort of, he said, man's capacity to destroy compels him to find a mechanism to preserve.
Right. Yeah.
And I'm saying that worse than he said it because he was very eloquent. The guy was.
Well, I mean, it's a brilliant sentiment. That's for sure.
He got it.
Yeah, he totally got it.
And that was 1906.
Yeah, I mean that's the height of Grinnell and Teddy Roosevelt. And
and also the height when your archaeology is such a big part of Painted Horses.
Yeah.
It was the height of our recognition that there were American values in preserving the ancients.
Yeah. Well, and archaeology has always been a real distraction for me / obsession. Something about the fact that there's a record left of these past lives that we will otherwise never know anything about is, I mean, it's just such a cosmic mystery to me. And, you know, it's eerie, and it's just endlessly fascinating to me.
Yeah.
But I wanted to use archaeology in the book as kind of as a totem or as a metaphor for destruction of anything, of a natural landscape, is sort of tantamount to destruction of our own past. Okay. Sure. And just show that what we're really destroying is a human dimension or a human part of ourselves. I mean, we're making these big decisions, and we're making, you know, bold ecology changing or landscape changing or even civilization changing steps, but not necessarily factoring the payoff in human terms when we do it. You know, progress comes at a cost to ourselves. Is somewhat, I think.
Well, I think the pandemic, and I certainly didn't. I think Jim Posowitz actually said this many years ago, wrote this, but it's a universal sentiment. And comes up in the pandemic a lot. It's what we do to nature, we do to ourselves.
Yeah,
you know what we may choose to do what we think is progress and not look at the consequences.
Yeah.
But the consequences are there nevertheless.
Yeah, I mean, Harrison said something at some point, like, you know, like in environmental degradation, or like that's, you know, he wouldn't have said it in a stiff way like that, but it's the equivalent of a psychopath burning down his house and then wondering why he can't live there.
Gotcha. Yeah, for sure. Now, there's I think it's a Harrison thing where the brown dog goes across that creek and it's all mudded up because the county put the culverts in there wrong.
Yeah.
And the cops are after him. And he said they'd be much better, you know, off if they tended to the health of their creeks and left me alone.
Right. Yeah.
Well, tell us. So the next book is the name Cloudmaker.
Yeah, the next book is called Cloudmaker.
And 6 months out.
Yeah, March of 2021 is the date, so far as I know at this point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what do you got going on, dude? Between now and then, like what's next for Malcolm Brooks?
Oh, as far as writing, I mean, I'm really having to tackle a lot of sort of back day job carpentry stuff at the moment. But I mean, I wrote a proposal for a third book, or I'm in the process of writing a proposal for a third book. I would love to see Painted Horses turned into like a single season television show. So I've done a few drafts of a tentative, TV pilot version of that. And it's got its own learning curve.
It's hard to do. I tried to do it myself.
Yeah.
And it's
the only scripting that I've done previously is for the outdoor television shows that I used to work on.
Yeah.
And that was a much more straightforward situation than trying to like script an actual narrative, especially an adaptation from a book, let alone my own book.
Yeah.
So I've tried that, dabbled in it some, thought about, possible other script original, show ideas. I mean, you and I were talking about, you had asked your son if he wouldn't, maybe want to try writing, speculative pilots for Netflix or Amazon or whatever. And
I think it's a good idea.
Yeah. I mean, I've considered doing that. I know there's a lot of other people doing it. But yeah, just glad to have this next one sort of wrapped as of a few weeks back. And
cool. Well, I sure appreciate your being here, man. I was I got to shoot the gun that's in the book.
Oh yeah,
which is a Mannlicher.
Yeah, it's a 1903 Mannlicher Schonauer, and I've had sort of again, yet another one of these sort of curiosities that I have a real affinity for. I think it's because probably from Hemingway, that's the book that Francis McComber's wife shoots him with in the end of the story.
Really?
Yeah, as a 1903 Mannlicher.
And that's mentioned in Painted Horses, but I didn't realize that was the same book. Gun.
Yeah, and there I had a really I mean the old Mannlicher rifles. I mean, it's an Austrian rifle, kind of a competitor to the Mauser rifles. Mauser was the sort of German, counterpart.
Yeah.
But this guy Ferdinand von Mannlicher was again somewhat like Paul Mauser or John Browning, this, pretty major arms designer in that era.
Yeah.
And he invented this rifle, the 1903 Mannlicher Schonauer. And, eventually the idea of the Mannlicher stock became somewhat of a generic, term describing the stock wood of the rifle runs
it goes
out,
all the way to the muzzle.
Out of the muzzle. But he sort of employed that on this design. And, I had just a bizarre experience that I tried to just sort of codify in the book with John H. When he first sees that rifle. He can identify exactly what it is, even though he's never seen it before, because he's read written descriptions of it, because it had sort of like literary cachet, even way back in the day. Mm-hmm. And that happened to me. The first time I ever saw one, I instantaneously knew what I was looking at. Yeah. Just from having encountered it in Hemingway and then, a few other written descriptions previously.
When we showed it to my friend here, he was just blown away by it because he is a Mannlicher. Yeah, like he knows a lot about them. Yeah, and he said he's never seen that one. Right?
Yeah. He said, this is the first one I've ever actually seen. Yeah, so, yeah,
that's cool. And what is Steve Bodio's connection here?
Oh, yeah. Well, Steve, I mean, it relates to Mannlicher rifles. He had posted on his blog in probably, let's say 2010 or so, about at least 10 years ago, that he was hoping to find a 1903 Mannlicher. Gotcha. And I had commented from time to time. I've been reading him for years. Me too. I mean, he is actually, I'm surprised that we haven't mentioned him previously in this because he was a very formative figure for me as a writer.
Gotcha. And with Carinthia?
With Carinthia, definitely, and Good Guns Again was like
I don't know that one.
This great primer that he wrote for people who are interested in, people of limited means who are interested in learning about pretty high toned, well done firearms, specifically from from Britain or continental Europe. But
it's called Good Guns Again.
It's called Good Guns Again
by Steve Bodio.
Yeah, by Stephen Bodio.
Gotcha.
Yeah, it's just terrific. So at any rate, he had posted on his blog, and I had occasionally sort of made a comment on his blog here and there relative to just whatever topic, sort of struck me. But he and I had never communicated at all. And then he posted that he was looking for a 1903 Mannlicher. And so I went ahead and extensively wrote to him and told him, what to look for and how to go about doing it, and that if you want it, I'd be willing to do some legwork and come up with something for him, because he is such an aesthete and such a sensibility. And I knew that he would really appreciate these rifles. Yeah. So lo and behold, within 2 or 3 days, the internet, gun trading thing being what it was at that point with Gunbroker and whatnot, I found a really
Guns America.
A really great specimen. And it had a buy it now price that was, sort of undervalued, I thought, but definitely, was something that could be regarded as a, as a good deal. So I forwarded that on to him, and sure enough, he bought it. And then he wrote back to me and he said, who are you? You write really well. And, what's your story? And so, and I had finished Painted Horses at that point, but it was sold. So this is 2012. Okay. Because Painted Horses sold to the publisher in March of 2012, and it wasn't published until 2014. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I had just sold it within, a matter of a few months. So I said, well, I'm a carpenter in Missoula, Montana, but I've also written this novel, which I did sell to Grove, and it's due to come out at some point, And he was just like, wow, can you send me a copy of it? And we didn't have galleys yet, but I just sent him, I think, the Microsoft Word copy that we were working on during the editing process. And he just got so behind it and so excited about it. And
it hits a lot of Steve Bodio, obsessions.
Definitely. Yeah. And again, that's one of those deals where Bodia was really formative for me because he was writing about a lot of the same and clearly had, a lot of the same interests as far as the sort of nexus between, hunting and old hunting cultures and art and, how, art really was kind of spawned by pursuit.
Yeah,
and
for sure.
Pursuit of animals, but also just pursuit of an idea.
Yeah, I gotta tell you, there's a guy I know, Joe Jansen, who's a writer in the Midwest. He sent me this clip from Joseph Campbell, and it is I guess you gotta look it up. It's in The Power of Myth, and Bill Moyers asks him about the hunt. And he says and I can't say it like Joseph Campbell. He actually struggles to get the words. Like he is like really trying hard not to mess this up. And he said it is the one place where human beings become nature. That they are the force because you're taking something, you're killing it to eat it. You yourself are going to the same fate. And you become a part. It's not I become a part of it all groovy. It's like you are it. You are doing nature.
You bet.
And you are nature. And that's why the cave paintings. That's what they're talking about.
Absolutely.
I'm gonna look this up because you're gonna it'll blow your mind.
Yeah, and it's that. I mean, it's the iconography that came out of the hunting culture and sex. Those are the two things that you see in those caves because those are the two like moments of reality.
That's right.
In the human experience. For me, at least.
Well, I think it's true. I mean, I think otherwise people are abstracted and have been abstracted since they lived in the caves. I mean, I think the human brain is for whatever evolutionary reason is a place where we abstract ourselves from the blood. We're and sexuality and hunt, killing, eating. Not so much eating because it's the pursuit. It's the pursuit, and then the culmination in those places. You are there.
Well, and those two things are so just inherently entwined with life and death realities.
That's it.
I mean, it is life and death reality. I mean, and to have it dramatized so well on those cave walls so long ago. It just I don't know. I look at those images and it's like looking into the abyss somehow. I mean, you're just seeing something that is as old as time and is absolutely just programmed into our deep psyche.
And what's that Werner Herzog film?
About the Chauvet cave. Well, that's another.
Is that the one you're talking about? Is that one of the ones, or is it Lascaux?
Lascaux is the one that I used as it's basically the one that John H. goes into. I don't name it, but it's Lascaux, and the characters who he's with, they're not named, but they're the Abbe Brule, who was the
keeper.
The keeper, the person. He was the preeminent expert at the time on that stuff. He was a Jesuit priest. And this other, character whose name, I hope I'm going to get this right. I think his name was Marcel Ravidat, and he was the one of the kids who discovered it when a tree fell down.
Gotcha.
Yeah, he was 17 years old at the time, and he was, with some of his buddies, and they were just up there doing their thing. And because they had this, teenage testosterone fearlessness, they went down into the ground. And the next thing they know, they're looking at this, unbelievable gallery of Ice Age animals.
Oh my Lord!
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah. It reminds me of what those guys must have felt like when they had that front end loader over in Wilsall. And they uncovered the Anzac site.
The Anzac site
with the two children. And totally painted in red ochre.
Yeah, and they said the ochre just came cascading out of it when they put when they hit the side of that bluff with the bucket of the tractor.
Is it an ochre vein, or was it there because of that?
It was entombed with them. Yeah.
Oh wow.
Yeah. And I mean, a lot of the artifacts, I mean, unfortunately, that site has never really gotten the due that it should have because they had pulled so much of the stuff out on a sort of, very unscientific basis. Right. There's no way of putting it back so that they could do actual sort of, up to the minute archaeological analysis on the thing, you know?
Yeah.
But I mean, all of that said, the fact that we've got I believe he was the child's remains were DNA dated to, or not DNA dated, but carbon dated.
Carbon dated, yeah.
To, I think it's 13,500 years old, something like that. I mean, it is the only known Ice Age burial remains in North America.
Right.
I mean, this is a hugely significant site.
Yeah. And it's, I mean, that changed so much for me, that reading about that, because, well, I was able to, for my friend Tom Dixon at Montana Outdoors, I was able to write a story about what it would have been like to hunt 12,000 years ago. That's where I got onto that. And I interviewed Steve Bodio.
Right.
I interviewed Doug Peacock. He had just written The Shadow of the Sabertooth.
Yeah, that's a great book.
Yeah.
And Doug, I mean, he came and saw me read in Livingston. You know, his wife actually owns the bookstore there.
Yeah, Andrea.
Yeah, but Doug came out, and he didn't know me from the Man in the Moon prior to that. I knew exactly who he was.
Yeah.
You know, and it's like, holy mackerel, hey dude.
There's the Peacock. Yeah.
So I mean, I'm up there and I read, and then the Q&A comes, and Doug all of a sudden just starts asking me these like incredibly poignant, detailed questions and making these observations about the book. And I was like, wow, he really read it. You know.
Yeah.
And he came up to me afterwards and he said, I love your book, and I hope it does really well. And he gave me this huge hug, and I was just like, wow, another seal of approval from a person that I, have admired for years and never would have had any idea that, something like this would happen.
Yeah.
It's pretty validating,
That's pretty, and he knows of what he speaks.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, that book is, the Sabertooth book it's very good.
I know
it's very unusual too. It's a Doug Peacock book. Nobody else but him would have written that. Could have ever written that book.
I know it.
So, but that's what got me onto the Anzac site, and that's what got me onto. It changed the way I see the world, because I drive around here, and I'm at the shores of I'm at the shores of Glacial Lake, Great Falls.
Yeah,
and then we have a friend who was up at where the channel. God, I can't remember what they call this. It's a lake, but it's a huge waterfall that was the Missouri.
Sure.
During the freeze thaws and unthaws. And this happened, like, if you look at the Missoula, right, the borderlines. Yeah. It happened, hundreds of times.
Yeah, it was a bunch. Yeah.
And so you proceed beyond that to Glacial Lake, Mussel Shell.
Yeah.
I mean, we're walking. And this is direct relevance to your book, but we're walking on the shores of ancient lakes where people just like us walk.
I know.
I mean, this all of this, and I tell you, I have learned to not get as depressed over environmental atrocities.
Yeah.
I still think that I still believe in combating them and to protect the ecosystems and all that stuff.
Right.
For a million different reasons.
Yeah.
But I also understand when you're walking on the lake Mussel Shell that things are a blip.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, everything.
They're both a blip and they're incredibly important.
I know. Yeah. And
oh, wow.
Yeah. Paradox, man.
Yeah, we live in it.
But the evolutionary nature of just life and the planet, in general is never, we do have this is a generalized problem at this point, but there's a sense of presentism, I guess, as, the Camille Paglia, would call it.
You tell me what presentism is?
Okay, it's a term she uses, and for people who don't know, she's basically an art. She's a professor of humanities in a college in Philadelphia, but she's pretty famous. She wrote a book called Sexual Personae probably 30 years ago.
I recognize her name, but not her work.
Yeah. But she is an extremely astute observer of art, and one of the things that she's noticing, apparently, I mean, this is just from reading interviews with her and whatnot, is this increasing sense amongst her classroom students of having really no grasp of anything that ever happened prior to their own generation's time frame. It's like we are now fixed in this utterly self-referential
presentism
phase of life, and it's problematic. I mean, a word I actually have come to hate because it's so overused at this point. But
problematic?
Yeah, the word problematic is like constantly, it's constantly used as an almost, I don't know. I mean, let's not even go there.
Dysfunction.
Yeah.
Matrix. Perfect storm.
I know. Yeah.
Right.
But
I get it, but it's also appropriate right there.
Yeah. There's a reason it's a word.
Yeah.
But yeah, just this
presentism.
And it's almost like a generational solipsism or something, where people just are not very adept at seeing the great breadth of both the human experience and also the geologic experience,
right?
And the geologic record. I mean, we are not living in a static plane. I mean, it's constantly moving and changing at whatever pace it moves and changes at. Sometimes it might be really cataclysmic, and sometimes it might be a long haul glacial thing. And I was up the canyon here not long ago, and I was it was early hunting season, and the reservoir was down because of the we've irrigated 160,000 acres or whatever, and there is a column of silt. I mean, it's the topsoil from those fires back in the Bob Marshall Wilderness and stuff. Right.
There's a silt. I mean, it must be 25 feet deep.
Yeah.
And in the places that the silt is not inundated continuously, the willows have come in there. Have you ever been on the Muscle Shell where it goes into Fort Peck? Yeah. You know that willow thicket? Mm-hmm. And I assume it's still there, but it's like impenetrable willows, like you can't believe it.
Right.
Those elk get through it.
That's amazing.
Yeah, but the silt is like this. I can't believe it. And I was like, I would have loved to have seen this canyon before this dam was built. And there was a voice in my head went off, and it goes, well, you may not see it, but it'll be that the dam is incredibly finite, dude. Yeah. like it is silting up as we speak. Right. And if we were not taking care of it, it would probably be gone. Like in the flood that we had last year. Sure. It would have gone. Yep. And so then there would be a big rapid there. Mm-hmm. And when Lewis and Clark came through here, they said that they didn't know what it was. They called it thunder and sand. Yeah. There was noises that bellowed out, and the Indians, whoever, I don't know what Native Americans they consulted about that because it wasn't the Blackfeet. They weren't talking to them. Right. The Blackfeet weren't interested in talking to Lewis and Clark about anything. I think that's the tribe that they shot. Yeah, one of. They were the young people were going to rob them of the horses. Right. And so, but this would have been in that same time. And there was just this general agreement that thundering sands existed here. What was it? And I think it might have been that canyon. Yeah. But now that's under a lake. Yep. And not forever. Yeah, not forever. Oh. I mean, the Fort Peck Dam itself is only like 90 years old. That's right. Yeah, and it's already showing signs of fatigue. It's incredible. Yeah. And that river is there's so much to talk about. I was super lucky. I got a job mapping that river from Fort Peck to Williston. Right. And spent like a month on a cataract. Yeah. A little bitty. And you see stuff in there you just can't believe. I bet. But there's not a lot of fish because there's no tributaries. It's so dry there. Sure. And then there's you get all the way to that other Sakakawea, I think, is the next lake. Mm-hmm. But we have changed that river forever in the course of 90 years. Yeah. You're talking about fast and slow and glacial. Sure. But in 180 years, probably going to be, I doubt it's going to be dammed up. Probably not. Not there anyway because it's silting up. Yeah. So, well, I know. Well, it's like the dam the Milltown Dam that they pulled out in Missoula. I mean, it is completely. So, I mean, I guess, for lack of a better word, it's basically totally restored the original. One of the coolest places I've ever been. Yeah. And I was there when it was Milltown Dam. Yep. Were you too? Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah. And, I remember the big controversy, and, there were. I know. I mean, it's. Yeah. They go, we want polluted settlements. Exactly. Lots of them. I know. And they were going. There was a sign that said, "Kill the hippies, save the dam, preserve the historic Milltown Dam." And it's funny because I'm almost talking in a reverse of some of the themes that are
really dear to me, you know, with historic preservation and whatnot. But then you're at the same time, you're like, well, you do have to take this on a case-by-case basis.
Exactly. You know? As in anything in life, right? The paradox again.
Yep.
But yeah, that was when Governor Schweitzer was touting this restoration economy.
Yeah.
And buddy, it was real.
Yeah.
Like there was so much money made and so much. Brad Tyre wrote a great book about Opportunity, Montana, and where they put the tailings.
Yep.
And the sacrifices that we made.
Oh, sure.
To remove the poison sediment.
Yep.
But I'll tell you what, it's a big success.
Yeah.
Holy smokes, is
it
it pretty?
See it now. It's gorgeous.
The Blackfoot River is just like pouring into the Clark Fort with all that mountain water.
Yep.
Yeah.
Pretty spectacular.
Shall we call it good?
Sure. Yeah.
We really will this time.
All right.
This happened to me with Tom McGuane. Somebody he said, y'all say goodbye like 7 different times on that podcast.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for being here, man.
Thank you, Hal. I mean, it's been a pleasure and an honor.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to the next book.
All right. Well, me too.
Hey, this has been Backcountry Hunters and Anglers Podcast and Blast. I'm Hal Herring. We're signing off for this one, but we'll be back in a week or 10 days. And meantime, check out backcountryhunters.org. Get some more podcasts there and see what we're up to. And also, I'm going to be out there wandering around hunting and fishing, wearing out a pair of boots. And hope you'll be doing the same thing. We're living in God's pocket, and we need to celebrate that. Never forget it. And get out there and live it and enjoy it. Hey, thanks a lot, everybody. Talk soon.